Boston is the only municipality in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts with an appointed, not elected, school committee. Our citywide coalition has submitted a non-binding ballot question for the November election to begin the process to change this. Many Bostonians have no idea how and when we lost the right to elect our school committee, and some have strongly held beliefs based on an incomplete story that omits the struggle for Black and brown representation on the Boston School Committee. In this city, when you say the words Boston School Committee, it won't be long before someone says Louise Day Hicks. Hicks was the villain of the school committee in the 1960s, openly opposing efforts to desegregate Boston public schools. Many believe that Hicks is the reason we now have an appointed school board. But she left the school committee in 1969, 22 years before the elected school committee was abolished. When we focus on the most openly racist politician this city has ever known, we erase a remarkable story of the struggle for Black political power and equal access to education in Boston. The Black struggle for political power on the Boston School Committee began long before Judge Garrity's ruling to desegregate Boston public schools in 1974. Leaders in the Black community, some of them parents in the district, ran for the Boston School Committee to try to provide equal access to education for Black children. Ruth Batson, Mel King, John D. O'Brien, among others, ran for school committee again and again, but could not win in an at-large election system that favored the predominantly white voting bloc. It wasn't until 1977 that John D. O'Brien won a seat on the Boston School Committee, becoming the first Black politician to serve on the board since 1900. This was the result of 2 decades of organizing and voter registration to empower the Black community. In 1981, Dr. Jean McGuire became the first Black woman elected to the at-large Boston School Committee. In that same election cycle, a ballot question passed that changed the Boston School Committee from 5 members elected at large citywide to 9 elected by district and 4 at large. This was a huge win for Black and brown voters because it meant they could be represented without winning a citywide majority. In the 1983 election, the first with the new district structure in place, 3 Blacks and 1 Afro-Latina were voted onto the board. This Boston School Committee went on to select Laval Wilson, the first Black superintendent of Boston Public Schools. But trouble was already brewing for the newly formulated school committee. Mayor Flynn was under pressure from powerful business groups to dissolve the elected school committee. In 1989, Mayor Flynn placed a question on the ballot to abolish the elected school committee and replace it with a 7-member board appointed by the mayor. Communities of color opposed this. So did the low-income whites of South Boston. But with hundreds of thousands of dollars in corporate money behind it, Flynn's proposal won by a razor-thin margin of 1.5%. Despite opposition from the Black members of the Boston City Council and the Black Legislative Caucus, a home rule petition passed in the city and then in the State House. And on July 6, 1991, Governor Bill Weld signed the home rule petition that abolished the elected Boston School Committee. In 1993, as Mayor Flynn left Boston to become the ambassador to the Vatican, he had a change of heart. In a letter written to the candidates hoping to replace him, he wrote, "Despite the accomplishments of the appointed board, I feel compelled to acknowledge that the loss of the vote for school committee members has remained a bone in the throat of many Bostonians. The appointed board has done what it had to do. It has accomplished a clean break with the past." Within Boston, where entrenched white parents felt like they were on the losing end of desegregation and then had to contend with a diverse elected school committee, it's no surprise that this painful era ended with the disenfranchisement of the Black community, who had finally found an entry point into Boston's political power structure via the Boston School Committee. But times have changed. Residents and leaders across the city are banding together to bring democracy back to school governance, just like every other city and town in Massachusetts. Join the campaign to reclaim your right to vote for representation on the Boston School Committee. Vote yes on this question appearing on the Boston ballot on November 2nd.